think the motive is normally, well, I think there's two different stages. One stage is normally involving a kind of a lonely train journey, or being on a plane and not having any other way of, for example, when you're taking off, you've got to put all your electronic devices away, and you have to sort of sit there and think for a bit. And in this day and age, there's not many times really when you're not connected to some sort of technology, but that is one of those times, especially when you're travelling a lot. And at those moments, I normally start writing lyrics in a little notepad, or because, for some reason, that sort of capsule of, there's nothing else going. I mean, the air's dead. There's nothing going on. I actually find that to be kind of a perfect environment for thinking, quite sort of focused thinking, and that's when I can write poetry but so that first stage has a motive, because that's where I'm really talking about something that's important, like a moment or a feeling. Those emotions probably rise to the top during times of being just travelling alone, or because you've got nothing else to do, and you're all the things bubble up to the surface, and so that is motivated by this kind of acute emotion. And then when I'm actually writing a track at home and I get those lyrics back and I look through what I've done and I try and piece a melody to those, with those lyrics, then the motive is just purely to make music. And that's, I suppose, in that way there is no motive when I'm actually producing those tracks. It's kind of music for music's sake. It's trying to make maybe sounds I haven't heard before, or mixing things that sound kind of strange to me at the time, but maybe using them in a way that kind of make them sound like they work with what's going on. But I suppose there's no motive when I'm actually producing.
Treated walls care for me, crossing skull on 103.
I guess you're certainly an artist who, is never afraid of reinventing yourself and exploring new sounds, which is really exciting to watch and to hear as well. Is that intentional, or is it maybe a matter that you get bored easily?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, the search for something that feels uncharted for me is the thing that inspires me, and the things that gets tracks finished. And so naturally, and possibly not even intentionally, that my sound changes all the time. But I think there's a common thread, and I don't think it really, just like you get a lot of artists who, through a whole career, might have records that sound completely different, but normally that's because they've been united with producers who are of a different, background, or have a different influence. And I suppose what I've done is kind of like the sonic changes of a career artist, kind of compressed into 1 or 2 years, because I have gone through those stages myself, production-wise, and I am my own producer, I suppose. Yeah, I do now. I mean, I think my manager Dan saw a grand design before I did. I mean, it's been more an influence on my career really than probably even the music that I make. Yeah. Because he kind of structured how it came out. He was bang on the button about when things should come out. There's certain, for example, I didn't really even want CMYK on the CMYK EP.
Really?
No, I didn't, because when I first did it, I thought it was just a laugh. I didn't actually. I did it, and I knew it felt fun, but I didn't take it seriously. I took it as something that was kind of really gratuitously euphoric at the time, but actually when it was translated to a club, it totally worked. And I didn't really realise that, and Dan was the person that just said, no, that's definitely going on there. Not only is it going on there, but it's going to be the title track of the EP. So that kind of second opinion is really what has structured my entire, career really, and even down to certain tracks being on the album that wouldn't have otherwise been, like "Give Me My Month," which I'm so glad is on the album now. Wasn't going to be on there until like about 3 days before we were supposed to submit the album. Me and Dan sat down and talked about order, and I played him that just randomly off the computer. He just went, that has to go on. And it's stuff like that. I mean, so there, I can't take credit really for the sort of the brainwave that has been some of the sort of career decisions, but I think I think we're a good team in the sense that I go through phases where I'd come out with 3 or 4 good tracks that will be of a certain sound, and Dan, and increasingly I now know how to get the most out of those tracks to make them feel like they are part of a new progression.
There is that interesting narrative that's been created through your partnership, but are you therefore conscious now of being in the middle of a narrative and now plotting in a sense where the story goes?
Well, I think it's actually got a lot more fun now, because now I can do things like release Pan and Order on Hemlock that have just come out, which is basically a vocalless, chordless 12-inch with just beats. And I can do stuff like that, and I can really change the way people actually view me, because, for a while now, I'm sure there'll be a lot of people who are just going, oh, what's all that, what's all this singing shit, I want to make some dubstep beats again. And, those people don't realise that all of this music's getting written at the same time, and there's no, to me, I didn't go to a studio and write a vocal album. I wrote a Millie remix the same time I wrote Unluck. I wrote I did CMYK the same time I did like Measurements, and it's not, there's no timeline for me in that sense. It's not, they're not written chronologically, but I think what a lot of people don't realise is that I have a kind of a thirst for I have a few different avenues of expression, and they all have to be serviced, or else I get frustrated. So, the album just happened to be a kind of a collage of the tracks that I thought would work together.
Yeah.
Just in the same way all the EPs are, and the 12 inches. So, it's kind of nice to then go from that vocal album, after a load of sort of criticism for becoming a sort of shiny pop act, which obviously it isn't. To doing to doing that dark, just very very dark record. When I wrote with no one else around, in space. To me, I had space. I'd go home to the house I grew up in. It'd be completely silent, no one around, apart from my parents maybe. And I just at night just make tunes, and there was no other sounds going on. And so for me, it wasn't like, oh right, I need to get in the studio, I've got 3 hours to get in the studio, I'm going to make some tunes. It was like I would sit there just in, and that space, that headspace is what made that sound. It wasn't because now all my tunes don't sound like that, because I've been on the road and I've been getting in and out of tour buses and going on doing promo and going to like chatting, like staying at venues from about 2 o'clock in the afternoon till 11 o'clock at night, and not having any break from sound, going to festivals, and even in your fucking even in your band room, you're hearing the thud of the kick drum from whatever band's on. So my music, since I've been on the road and writing on the road, has been chaotic. Like it doesn't sound like that. There's been no none of the kind of I only know style silences or like none of that, and that's just because of headspace. But when I went back to Enfield recently, and I just had a couple of days, I sat in the same room that I made all the other stuff in, and I made something that just repeated for a long time, and it had that space in it, and it's probably the best thing I've done for a while.
You've said before about the space and darkness in dubstep. Is that sort of what attracted you to that genre in the first place?
Yeah. But I think also rhythmically, dubstep is far more interesting than anything else I was hearing at the time. And, you know, for example, just the drum programming of some of the producers that were making tunes at the time, Scream, Mala, they were kind of just very subtle movement of like a shaker, like, you know, or like something that would drive something forward so much, and it would give it swing, it would give it, you know, and there were so many styles of dance music at the time that didn't have that. It's kind of like, it gave me the feeling that jungle kind of gave me in some ways, but in a lot more focused, kind of more spacious way. But I admired the fact that all these producers cared about where that shaker was. You know, they actually cared about that tiny little detail, and because I really care about that, and I started to really care about it, and you know, the attention to detail in that music is really quite something.
I guess with the album, even though, as you were saying, it was perhaps a different sound than some people were expecting from you at the time, that you said with the record you felt like you were being totally honest, and that idea of honesty and not compromising is something that seems really important to you. Would you say?
Yeah, it is. It's the only thing you've got. There has to be a level of resoluteness about what you actually, you know, what you put out, and whether you feel like you're being true to your own plan, I suppose. I mean, when someone says, do you want to, you know, these tracks are great, they're great demos, like when they say that and you've like just finished these tracks and you're really happy with them, and then someone says, yeah, we could get like you with a producer who'd like, you know, make these sound really good, especially when you've produced it, that's not really what you want to hear. And if you then say, yeah, okay, let's go and get it produced by somebody else, then what are you doing? You're just giving up half of what you've done. You're giving up the entire process being just you is what characterises the whole music. And you know, if you give that up, then I mean, it's not just a compromise. It's a flat out, you know, it's suicide in terms of creative suicide. You're not suddenly you're not really, you know, you're giving up so much. And so if I was to have said yes to that, then yes, that would have been dishonest, because that's not what I want. And that's all it really means. It's just about sticking to your guns sometimes, and I don't think everyone's always in a position to do that, and sometimes there's pressure, so much pressure for people to, especially when they're not necessarily in the same position to actually get their songs produced. It's the one, to me, it's the real sort of bane really on new artists, and the real sort of failure of the industry. It's, you know, it's not, you know, people making money or not making money, or having digital downloads and, you know, losing people not buying records. That isn't the failure. The failure is at source, which is when the music's made and when the music's sort of remade. That's a joke. Like, that shouldn't happen. But you know, when you've got the option to do it, not everyone. You know, sometimes it works out really well, but I've seen it happen a lot, and I was determined that wasn't going to happen to me.